Hi there, my name is Brian Klebig, and this is COM 275. Now, we have got a lot to do in this class, and obviously this class is not a traditional class, so let's make a good plan for today and then get started. Here's what we're going to do. First off, we're just going to talk about COM 275 as a class, and we're going to talk about the COM department at MSU. I'll give you kind of like a user's manual, I suppose you could say, for the COM 275 class. I mean, you want to make sure that you pay very close attention to that information. That's where we're going to describe our assignments for the semester and basically everything that's going to factor into your grade. So make sure that you have that information down pat. Then we're going to cover the first 3 chapters of our class. So we're going to start off with understanding media effects, where we'll talk about how we're going to be considering communication for study. We'll define communication and figure out exactly what it is that we're looking at. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at some methods for scientific inquiry into media. How is it that we actually scientifically study media and media effects? And then finally, we're going to start off a look at the history of media effects research, so we kind of understand the trajectory that research has been on over the past century or so. Sound good? All right, let's get started. So once again, I'm your instructor, Brian Klebig, and you can feel free to call me Brian. My particular areas of research are media psychology and cognitive effects. But I also do some dabbling in persuasion and in organizational communication. I've been married for 13 years to another communication scholar, and together we have 2 little girls. One is 3, and the other is 10 months old. She's going to actually have her first birthday over the course of our class, so maybe we can do something, fun with that. I'm a nerd, and you're going to definitely see that over the course of this class. You can definitely expect lots of Star Wars and video game references and that sort of thing. Probably lots of zombie references as well. If you haven't seen Star Wars, you should, and maybe we can work out some assignments along those lines too, since I do tend to bring them up very frequently. If you aren't acquainted with the COM department at MSU, that's definitely something we want to talk about, because you're taking a COM class in what's probably the most storied communication department in the entire world. Over the past 60 years, MSU has consistently ranked #1 in the world for communication. And that's not just me, trying to chest thump and, wave a green banner and say, go green. I mean, we, by almost everybody's assessment, have the best COM program in the entire world. And this is largely because MSU focuses very tightly on quantitative measurement of communication. We run lab experiments. We design and develop new theoretical perspectives. We take an objective view towards media. So we want to be able to quantify and measure media and media effects. Now, if you're going to study media, this is not the only way to do it, right? You don't have to be a scientist, strictly speaking. You don't have to run lab experiments. There are other ways to do it, and in this class, we're actually going to look at some of those other ways in which you can do it. And those methods are certainly valid, but I want you to know this as a background. This is what I do. I'm a communication scientist, and any given COM class that you take at MSU, the instructor is first and foremost going to be a scientist. And as such, we very strongly believe in objective measurements and quantifiable results. Now, COM 275 is essentially the introductory course for communication science and for communication research. The objective here is to start you on a path which can result in you understanding how media is researched. You can understand the field. And hopefully you'll be able to also understand some of the questions that remain unanswered and maybe get some ideas for your own future. This class, COM 275, is a famously challenging class. The mean score for the semester typically hovers around 77%, and that's for the folks who are taking it over the fall or the spring, so they have an entire semester to study it. Over the summertime, our time is abbreviated, so it'll be even more condensed than it usually is. Just want to give you this as a heads up. It is going to be a challenging class, and it is going to be time-consuming. Now, that being said, this is still a summer class, and I want to keep it in the spirit of a summer class, and so we're going to try to be lively about things, and we're going to try to be pretty laid back. So let's talk about what you're going to be doing each week. First off, every single week there's going to be a video just like this one that you're watching right now. And in these videos, I'll cover what I consider to be the absolute most important portions of the assigned readings. This is intended to be an opportunity just for me to highlight and express a few specific thoughts. However, it's important that you know that this is not the entirety of what you must know on a week-to-week basis. Each week, there will also be several PowerPoints that get uploaded to D2L, and you're going to want to download and review each one of those PowerPoints thoroughly. Now, in these PowerPoints, you're going to see some text in yellow. The stuff in yellow is the stuff that you are responsible for knowing in this class. Any of it is fair game for quizzes, and any of it is fair game also for your final paper, which we're going to talk about later. In other words, if you only watch the videos and you don't do the assigned readings and you don't follow the PowerPoints, you won't pass this class. It's very important that you actually get all of the information. These videos are just going to direct you in the most important directions. Now, your grade is going to be calculated off of 3 criteria. 100 points are going to come from quizzes. Now, most weeks you'll have a quiz that you need to complete. The quizzes are going to be multiple choice, and you're going to have about 20 minutes to complete them. Now, make sure that you have a block of undistracted time when you sit down to take those tests, because they are timed, and when that 20 minutes runs out, your time is up. You'll find the quizzes on D2L. I'll always have them opened up by Thursday morning at the very latest, and sometimes I'll have them earlier open. And they're due by 11:59 p.m. on Friday. 100 points of your grade is going to come from your final paper. Giving an online final exam for a summer course is awful. You hate it, I hate it, it's useless, because you can look all of the information up. So what questions are there that I can possibly ask that would indicate whether you understood the material or not? So instead, I assign a final paper. The paper is only 5 pages in length, but the problem is, the trick to it is you're only going to have about 5 days to complete it. At the end of the semester, I'll make available a list of acceptable topics, and you'll pick one and you'll start writing. These topics are going to focus on your ability to apply the knowledge that you've gained over the course of the semester to research. And we'll talk more about it when the time gets close. So in the meantime, you don't need to worry about those 100 points. The last 100 points of your grade are going to come from weekly discussions. Each week, at some point in the video lecture, I'll give you a topic to discuss on D2L. And what you're going to do is record a video. You can just use your webcam. Record a video of yourself addressing that topic. The videos don't need to be anything incredible. If you just take a webcam video of yourself answering the question or commenting on the topic, that is just fine. Don't even worry about it. Now, of course, if you are gifted in the area of editing, feel free to have as much fun with them as you want to. That's absolutely great, too. When you go to the appropriate discussion section for the week, and don't worry, I'll always have the discussion sections named something straightforward. This first week, it's week 1 discussion. What you'll do is you'll post a link to the discussion post by clicking on this button in the discussion window right here. I usually upload mine to YouTube first in order to get them online, but however you want to do it is just fine. Once you've posted your video, the rest of the class discussion opens up, and that'll allow you to watch the other students' videos. When you watch those, I want you to pick 3 other student videos and just write a brief response to them. Your responses don't need to be anything long. They just have to be something thoughtful. You can't just write, like, I agree and call it good, right? If you do agree, then why do you agree? Is there some experience in your life that lends itself to what they just said? You can feel free to disagree, but when you disagree, just make sure that you're always politeful and respectful. We want to make sure that everyone's ideas are taken seriously here. So between those 3 things, that means there's 300 points available on this semester. We use a 4-point grading scale. If you get a 90% in this class or above, you net yourself a 4.0. 85% is a 3.5, 80% is a 3.0, 75% is a 2.5, and so on and so forth. You can get the entire grade breakdown on D2L on the news sidebar, and it should be there right now. I am available to take office hours. I'll be around for most of the summer. However, in June, I'm going to be spending a healthy chunk of it in Japan. It's probably most convenient for everyone if I have office hours online. So what I'm going to do is every single Tuesday at 8 p.m., I'm going to open up my own Zoom room online. Zoom room is this live online meeting place. I'll send out the link for it every single Tuesday so that if you want to meet me for office hours between 8 and 10, you can certainly do so. If you'd like to meet on campus, that's just fine too. Just shoot me an email and we can work that out. Last but not least, make sure that you use the syllabus, review the syllabus. This is an online class, so you're going to need to self-manage more than your average college course. That means you're going to have to make extensive use of the syllabus online. So if you have a question, be smart and consult the syllabus first. All right, time for the fun to start then. Let's give you your first assignment. For your first assignment for COM 275, I want your first video discussion to simply be an introduction of yourself. Now, if you want to get full credit on this discussion video, you're going to need to tell us all of the following. First, you'll need to tell us your name, obviously. You're going to need to tell us your major. You'll want to tell us what year you are. And then the interesting part, tell us whether you typically prefer movies, television, or video games. And then, whichever one of those you pick, tell us what your favorite movie, television program, or video game is. Then, lastly, to end it all off, in the spirit of what we've already talked about, tell us whether you've seen Star Wars. If you have seen Star Wars, what did you think of it? And if you haven't seen Star Wars, why haven't you seen it? Okay? Great, that's introductions out of the way. I'm very excited about this class. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So let's jump right on into it and start talking science. Let's start off with a quick definition concerning what mass communication is. Now, mass communication is a large-scale distribution and reception process which is one-directional. In other words, the information flows out in one direction. You aren't talking back to the television when the television is delivering information to you. If you do, that's a little on the freaky side. And if you did talk to the television, you wouldn't expect the television to respond to what you said, right? That's one-directional information. So, large-scale distribution and reception process, it's one-directional. It features an impersonal source and anonymous receivers. What that means is that the source is somebody that you're not actually familiar with, or you might be familiar with them, but you don't have a relationship with them. If you're watching a news anchor delivering the news to you, it's not like you actually know this person. It's not like you actually have formed a relationship with them. You have a kind of relationship with them, but it's not a personal one. And you're anonymous. The anchor might be looking at you in the sense that he's looking into the camera, but he can't see you. And so he has no idea the actual people that he's talking to. It's got an asymmetrical source-receiver association. And that basically means the communicator, so back to the news, let's say it's the anchor or the news organization, they are powerful and you aren't, right? You don't have any ability to influence what it is that they are saying. You don't have an ability to debate what it is that they are saying. They have all of the power to say whatever it is that they want to you. Involves a market exchange relationship. In other words, the communicator has something to gain by delivering this information. Maybe it's almost always it's going to be money. It's always almost always going to be an economic benefit. And it's standardized content that's delivered to all, right? If you are watching CNN and your neighbor is watching CNN, you are both watching exactly the same program. It's not like CNN is custom tailoring it just so that at your house it looks one way, and at your neighbor's house it's specially for him a different way. Everyone gets the exact same content. Now we're going to be using something called Laswell's model of communication for almost all of our considerations concerning media effects. And really this breaks down most of the ways in which you can think about how communication works, right? So Laswell's model of communication goes, who says what, to whom, with what effect, through what channels. So that's definitely something you're going to want to know. Once again, who says what, to whom, with what effect, and through what channels. So let's just break down each of those individual little bits. So the who part, that's the source, right? That's the nature of the media organization. That's the nature of the speaker, right? That's the who aspect, right? Are they credible? Are they likable? Who do they usually talk to? What is in it for them? How big are they? That sort of thing. The what part, that's the content, right? That's what has actually been said. We would say that it's likely that the exact same story will be delivered in a different manner depending on whether it's aired on MSNBC or on Fox. They will word things differently, and their wording choices are going to make a difference for how that content comes across. The to whom part obviously is talking about the audience. We're going to do some pretty focused audience examinations later on in the semester, but we're going to be looking at the kind of people who receive this information and how distributors of information think about their audiences. They can think about them in a number of different ways, depending on what their objectives are. With what effect? We're going to think about specifically intended and unintended effects, right? So I watch a piece of media, and what is it that I get out of it? And what is it that they meant for me to get out of it if it's an intended effect? So under the intended effects, you've got to inform, right? Maybe they want to give me information about something. The news certainly wants to inform us of something. Maybe to guide and persuade, maybe to bend a vote, right? That would be something that's definitely taking place right now. Maybe to educate. Maybe you just want to teach somebody something about the world. To entertain, that's obviously a big one. And entertainment theory is kind of my bag. I'm an entertainment researcher. However, there are also unintended effects, of course, and those tend to get a lot of study, right? What if you play a lot of violent video games? Does this make you a violent person? What if you watch a lot of very sexually charged media? Does this maybe have a negative influence on children, right? Those unintended effects of media viewing are very, very popular areas of research. Through what channel? When we're talking about channels, what we're really talking about are different mediums. A medium is just a means by which information is communicated. So it could be newspaper, could be radio, could be television, could be via the internet, could be over your smartphone. And each of these things can have a very big, profound effect, right? This is probably an apocryphal story, as we know now, but you might have heard that during the debates, the presidential debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. If you were listening on the radio, you thought that Nixon won the debate. If you were watching it on TV, you thought that John F. Kennedy won the debate. So the medium meant something for how people interpreted that message. Now, there's other confounds involved there, but that's just one example. We'll also take a little bit of a look at future media, too, with this. We'll look at virtual reality. We'll look at augmented reality and that sort of thing. And then with what effect, but we'll get into that, of course. This is media effects. That's the whole of the class. Let's talk a little bit about the actual way in which we scientifically investigate media effects and media in general. As I said, at MSU, we take a quantitative view of communication research. We research it theoretically. When you think about theory in a calm sense, I'd like you to think of it as like a perspective or a framework with which you can consider media, or within which you can consider media. We'll usually map up communication research avenues using a model. We use models just as a graphical means of explicating an abstract process like communication. So here's an example here of a communication model. And I want to call your attention to some things here and define some terms. Every single box on this model is a variable. A variable is just something that can change, right? The first box is the independent variable. It's a condition or a state which starts the process. So in our model here, it's a persuasive message. Generally speaking, if you're going to be doing this sort of thing, you're probably going to have several different persuasive messages that probably have varying degrees of effectiveness. So those are the conditions. The last box here is the dependent variable, and that's what we expect to change based on the other variables in our model. We expect to see a difference in whether or not people are persuaded. Maybe if there's a strong message to start off with, then we might expect people to be persuaded in a particular way, given the amount of knowledge they have and that sort of thing. Now, between the independent variable and the dependent variable, you have other ones, and those are called mediating variables. Those are the variables that come in between the independent and dependent variable. Let's try a different model for a second. I could hypothesize that because the murder rate goes up in the summer, heat causes violence. But it's likely that there's probably a mediating variable, right? It would be odd if just the presence of heat had a direct impact on your brain that forced you to start killing people or really strongly influenced you to start killing people, right? So more likely it's that when it's warm outside, people are more likely to be outside and in contact with one another. So heat allows for more contact, and the more contact that there is, the more likely it is that people are going to start shooting each other. That would mean that contact likelihood is the mediating variable here. So let's say that one of these paths might be stronger. If, for example, a person is younger, right? Then we'd have a bubble here, and it'd be called a moderating variable. The younger that you are, the more likely you are to murder on a lovely summer's day. So this variable here would be a moderator. It moderates the strength of the relationship between two variables. When we're actually ready to examine a media effect in people, there are a number of different research methods that are available to us to conduct this investigation. First off, there's content analysis. Now, content analysis simply counts the number of instances that something occurs in media. So let's say I want to investigate how many times in Academy Award-winning movies a woman gets punched by another woman, right? What I would do is I just watch all of those movies, and every time that a woman punched another woman, I would make a little mark on my tablet, and at the end I'd count up how many times that happened over how many movies, and then I'd have my answer. That's a content analysis. So it's a purely descriptive thing, right? There's no evidence of any sort of effects there. There was recently a study involving Disney movies, and what it was doing was it was counting the number of lines that were spoken by female characters. And what it was finding was that in the dramatic majority of Disney movies, the majority of lines were spoken by men. Now, they were trying to imply with this that there was a gender bias present in Disney movies. However, with a content analysis, you really can't do that because it doesn't provide you any evidence of an effect. And actually, when you took a closer look at that content analysis, you realized that whatever the gender of the villain happened to be, that was the gender that had the most lines. So for the old movies where the women tended to be villains, the women had more lines. You had the evil queen, and you had Maleficent, right? For the newer movies where men tend to be the villains, where you have Dr. Facilier, my own personal favorite Disney villain, those are the movies where men tend to have more lines. So just because it tells you how much of something you have doesn't necessarily tell you an effect. So that's the outcome, right? A content analysis will tell you how much of something you have. It tells you how content might differ, right? If you want to talk about how often a particular word is used in rap music as opposed to rock music, it can tell you that. But it's limited to categories, and that can make things very difficult, right? Like, let's say I have a content analysis and I want to say, I want to see how many instances of violence there are in children's movies, right? What constitutes then violence, and how rigid are you going to be? Is throwing a snowball a violent act in a movie? Well, in a movie like A Christmas Story, yeah, it probably was violent there. The kid threw that snowball as an act of aggression, right? But if it's Dora the Explorer and they're having a snowball fight at the end, it's probably not an act of aggression. I throw a snowball at my 3-year-old, not hard, obviously, and she thinks that's hilarious and fantastic. It wasn't really an act of violence. So sometimes these categories can cause problems. You have to be very clear and very rigid whenever you're conducting a content analysis concerning your categories. Surveys are an extremely popular way to take a look at naturally occurring populations and look at some feature that they might have within them. So a naturally occurring population would be something like MSU students or Americans or Michiganders or people based off of a demographic variable like women and that sort of thing, right? And we use them to describe characteristics of a population. Who are they? What are they like? What do they think? How do they behave? That sort of thing. It lets us establish relationships, right? We can say that when one thing goes up, another thing goes up too, right? We can say people who watch a lot of The Walking Dead are more likely to watch a lot of Star Wars, that sort of thing. The more Star Trek you watch, the more likely you are to have watched Firefly, that sort of thing, right? And surveys are great then for showing relationships, and they generalize very, very easily. They're very applicable things. Now, one issue with them is that they can't show causality, right? I can never demonstrate that thing A causes thing B. I can only demonstrate that they coexist, right? The other problem with surveys is that sometimes people aren't great at answering for themselves, right? Like let's say I want to conduct some research and find out what color car racist people prefer to drive. If I ask a question that says, on a scale from 1 to 10, how racist are you? I probably shouldn't expect to get honest answers for people because people are smart enough to know rating yourself highly on this would not be desirable. So I have to rely on other indicators, and even there, if I'm relying on indicators, indicators are very fallible, and people will probably see what I'm trying to get at. Scientifically superior probably to surveys in most ways would be longitudinal research. Longitudinal research is research that wants to show outcomes at more than one point in time. So let's say I'm researching whether playing violent video games makes a person more aggressive. I can have them play, and then I can immediately administer a test, and poof, voila, I find out that they're more aggressive, right? Then I wait 3 minutes, and I administer another test, and poof, the effect is gone. Then maybe I wait a week and I re-administer it, and of course it's completely gone. And in fact, that is what we see with violent video game research. We can demonstrate that a person is more aggressive for about 3 minutes after they play a violent video game. Right? Longitudinal research can look at the lasting influence of some particular variable. They use 2 different ways to look at longitudinal research, right? We can use panel studies. Panel studies look at the same group of people, and then you gauge them at multiple points in time. So let's say I am trying to influence a group of people to vote for, let's not actually use any real candidate. Let's say I'm trying to get them to vote for Fred Flintstone. There we go. And so I give a persuasive message for voting for Fred Flintstone. And then over time, I continue to poll them to see how likely they are to vote for Fred. Cohort studies will use different samples, but they're going to look at them across multiple time points. Probably the most famous one of these is Sesame Street. Sesame Street came out, I believe it was in the 60s, and they wanted to see how effective their program was for getting students ready for kindergarten, and so they started testing kindergartners, and every year they'd test kindergartners again and see if Sesame Street was helping to improve how ready children were to go into kindergarten, and they found out that they were having a positive influence on it. Right? That would be a cohort study. Now, longitudinal research is great because you can see change over time, and that's probably what really matters. It's extremely tough on a budget, though. Longitudinal research is very expensive to conduct. And because you can't keep somebody in a lab for months on end, this research, A, takes forever, and B, they're out living their life and having other things happen to them. And so there are other influences on a person which might account for the effects that you see when you're doing longitudinal research. If you're doing a study on how Americans view Middle Easterners, and right in the middle of your study there's a terrorist attack, then you might have problems with your results, right? It might influence people to think more negatively of them. Or if it was a different ethnic group, then maybe it makes them think more positively of them. But it wasn't due to your manipulation, it was just due to the world around them. So that can ruin a study very quickly. Now, the MSU preferred way of conducting research into communication is definitely with the lab experiment. Lab experiments are designed to assess causal relationships, right? We want to look with a lab experiment, you want to establish when thing A happens, thing B is this likely to also happen, right? In order to establish a causal relationship, let's be very clear about what the word causal means. They have to be all three of these things. First off, they have to be correlated. In other words, when one changes, it produces a change in the other. They have to be sequenced, time order sequenced. That means if thing A changes, then thing B changes, and not vice versa, right? So if I have you play a violent video game, then you get more aggressive. Not more even more aggressive people are more likely to play video games, right? Which is more violent video games, which is true. And there can't be a third variable cause, right? I can say, looking at data, I can say that ice cream causes murder because ice cream sales are positively correlated to the murder rate. But more likely, there's a third variable involved there, which is hot days, which is probably driving the effect. If you've got hot days, the murder rate is going to go up, and if you've got hot days, you are going to sell more ice cream. At least we better hope that, or else the MSU dairy store is a ticking time bomb. So anyway, experiments are great for establishing causality, and they give the researcher a lot of control over things. Now, some problems are that the lab setting might not be appropriate for a given study, right? Or, potentially, the researchers might have some bias in their research design, which will cause problems and might even cause their preconceived notions to be upheld. Sometimes these things can happen subconsciously. We've got studies that demonstrate that most of the time when a researcher already has an idea of what the results are going into an experiment, that's the results that the experiment will produce. So that hardly seems legit in a lot of instances. Now, we've talked about lab experiments. There's another kind of experiment that you can run called a field experiment. This is like a lab study, except that instead of getting people into a lab, you try to study them in a real-life setting. Sometimes, these can be very difficult things to study. So, for example, MSU did a study a long time ago. Actually, it might not have been MSU now that I think about it, but they wanted to see what the effect was on a person when they're going to the bathroom and somebody sidles up into close proximity with them, right? Because when you experience anxiety, if you're a male, there's a little bit in you called the preurethral sphincter, which contracts when you start to get nervous or anxious. Right? And so what they did was they went to a bathroom and they wired up teeny tiny little cameras inside of the urinals, and they measured the amount of urine flow that was coming from a person when they were going to the bathroom, and then randomly they would have somebody come right up next to a person while they were going to the bathroom, and they would measure what it did to that stream, right? And by measuring what it did to that stream, you could extrapolate how much the preurethral sphincter contracted, and that would give you a measure of that person's anxiety. Now, this makes for a much more natural behavior, right? This would be a very difficult experiment to conduct in a lab, but obviously it doesn't allow you for a lot of control, right? Maybe there just happens to be a specific kind of nervous person who happens to use that bathroom. And of course, the bigger issue is there's some ethical issues here, right? Maybe people don't want to be observed under those circumstances, and they haven't signed up for this. In a field experiment, you don't let people know in advance that you're going to be studying them. So they have to be pretty rigorously vetted by an institutional review board, an IRB. You've also got meta-analyses. Meta-analyses are where researchers take just a gigantic number of published research reports, and then they cram them together so that they can make one overarching statement about some particular question, right? Let's say I want to talk about how persuasion works well under the elaboration likelihood model, which was the model that we saw earlier, right? I might take the 180 studies that have been conducted on that and see in general how effective is this at measuring persuasion and what methods are effective for achieving persuasion if you're using ELM as your paradigm. You also have triangulation. Sometimes that's called mixed methodology research, or MMR. This is where you use a bunch of different methods to address the same question. So, for example, maybe you do a content analysis and a survey and a lab experiment, all designed to try to get at this one question that you're trying to examine and figure out an answer to. Let's wrap up our first class. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's wrap up today by looking at some historical events in mass media research. We'll start back in the 1920s. In the 1920s, people, particularly researchers and philosophers, were getting really worked up about what was happening in the world, right? You had the Industrial Revolution, and that was well past, but it had really altered the way that the world worked, right? People had been pulled out of rural communities because there were better jobs in cities and factories, which meant that communities were kind of collapsing. People were becoming more isolated. And as this occurred, a lot of people were worried that humanity in general would have fewer social ties, that they'd have fewer sources of information, that they'd have very few strong voices telling them how they should think about things. And that's valuable, to have, friends and family and people who can express their viewpoints to you, so you get, a lot of different viewpoints and you can think about things in a broad way. And the fear then was that the only real source for information and perspective that people would have would be the media, which would make the media very, very influential on their thoughts. So they called this process normlessness, right? That there wouldn't be any such thing as an individual norm, that media would determine the norm for everybody. This led to a theory, which you'll definitely want to know for the whole rest of the semester. It's called magic bullet theory. Magic bullet theory, the idea behind it was essentially that mass media messages hit everyone in the exact same way and with a big, powerful effect. Because you didn't have other people's input on things, when you got information from the media, magic bullet theory would suggest that it had a gigantic effect on you. You didn't have others to rely on for opinions, and so media makes all the difference. And people really bought this theory for decades. But then something kind of funny happened. And what happened really to shake it up was that Orson Welles broadcast the War of the Worlds. I'm going to try to find a good clip of War of the Worlds and stick it on D2L so that you can listen to it. But I promise you that if you just Google it, you'll find plenty of instances in it. Now, what happened was that Orson Welles did this thing as a Halloween prank, kind of, where they did this very realistic, or at least realistic for the day, news coverage insinuating that the world was being invaded by aliens. Now, a lot of people were tuned into the radio station that day. It's estimated that about 12 million people heard that message. And out of those 12 million people, 2 million of them completely freaked out and thought that it was real. Now, this is obviously a pretty powerful effect, right? This was capable of causing riots, and so at first it might look like magic bullet theory was was being upheld, except if magic bullet theory was true, then why didn't it have a uniform effect like magic bullet theory would predict, right? Why didn't all 12 million people behave in the same way? This problem, introduced by War of the Worlds, opened the door to some real innovations in how we look at and understand media. And that's it for this video lecture this week. Don't forget to go thoroughly through the PowerPoint slides, make your video discussions for this week, respond to your classmates, and don't forget to take that quiz on D2L. The quiz will be on chapters 1, 2, and 3, as well as on our syllabus. And I will see you next week.